Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List. This is my 8th episode, I believe, in my subseries Amy's Progress, wherein I am choosing philosophical and existential / religious films to sort of complement my journey on becoming a healthier whole individual. Today, I am with my longtime friend, Christopher, who is Zig, affectionately called Zig on Letterboxd. This is only the second episode that we have done together for my pod, but I was on his pod, and I was the first guest on his pod. So I feel that counts for many episodes. I don't know how you feel about this, Christopher, but hello, and I'm happy to have you.
Thank you. Hello, friends. Nice of you to tune in.
Yes, true.
I agree. It feels like it's a lot more than just 3.
It does, but that's because we are friends.
Well, we've talked about a lot of movies.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of correspondence in Letterboxd.
Yeah.
It's what it's there for.
It is, and I think that you and I both, you perhaps more than me, although you have to admit I've come a long way. When I first met you, you were collabing it up all the time, and I thought that you were like incredibly proactive in that area, and I have since done quite a few collabs. Probably not to your level, but still, I've taken a page of your community book.
Out of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that letterboxers like yourself and Jetta have surpassed me in the collab realm as of late.
Scary.
I've sort of taken a back seat to some of it, but if anybody still wants to do it, I am more than happy to oblige.
And you still do that, your main collab group, right? Which is like the collab.
Yes, we still do that every Sunday. We drop reviews, and it's been a great time. I've been in part of that for 3 years.
And then the Searchers Pod is, how many episodes has it been now? I'm going to put you on the spot.
No, that's absolutely okay. We just dropped episode 39 2 or 3 days ago, the day before Halloween or on Halloween. We dropped our latest episode.
So almost at 40.
Almost at 40. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I just dropped my 50th with Mark last week.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So it's pretty close, even though the Searchers started a little bit later than me, right?
Yeah. You're a one-woman show, though, with guests. So
good point.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's easier for me to sort of pump them out faster because there's only 2 schedules instead of 3, right? That's fair.
Yeah, that's fair. Exactly.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Yes.
And you guys only do one film per, right?
1 film per episode. Well, we mix it up quite a bit. So
yeah,
some episodes we've done 3 or 4 or 5. So it depends. Most episodes are just one. The next common is probably 2, where we cover and do a comparison or the like. Do
you just decide in the moment? I mean, is this a structured thing, or is this just something that you guys decide depending on what the film is?
It's mostly the latter, but we do like to have some structure for certain ideas.
Mm-hmm.
The theme of the pod is pretty open. It's searching for films that people have generally not heard of or would not normally seek out. With occasionally that's even a little incorrect because we have covered some popular stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of your MO, though, is the hidden gems.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, speaking of hidden gems, this is definitely one, I feel. This is a movie that I felt... I picked this for Christopher and I to cover together because it kind of goes with your aesthetic, I feel, and the types of vibes that are usually in the movies you like, where there's kind of a chill, sort of laid-back nature, but also like imminent, something very pressing that's very serious, and then also characters that are very dialogue-driven. Like there's a lot of talking usually, and then sharing, like intimate conversation. So I picked Taste of Cherry for Christopher and I. It's a 1997 movie directed by Iranian director Abbas Kiarostami. And this is my favorite of his. I don't know if it's the same for you, of the ones that you've seen.
Yes.
Yes.
I am in the same car. I was going to say boat.
But it's apt to say car.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't sound right. Yeah.
In context, this is actually completely spot on.
Thank you.
Yes. So since this is a movie that honestly most people will not have heard of at all, first of all, it's a foreign film, but it's also Iranian, and although it's popular, I think, in cinephile circles, definitely not outside of them. So, Christopher, give us a little bit of plot, just to set it up, and as I will always do for Amy's Progress, we are going to spoil the whole entire thing. So if you haven't seen this, it'll be a lot better if you have. Go ahead.
Of course. I'd say, just to piggyback on what you segued there, it's probably a very popular film on Letterboxd. Like that's the kind of community I think cinephiles
that would embrace it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as the plot goes, we have this main character, Mr. Body. Is that how you would pronounce it?
Yeah. Badhi.
Yeah, it's Indian, right, or Middle Eastern, so Body.
Body.
Yeah.
Sure.
So Mr. Body, he's our main character, and at first you're just kind of thrown into the vehicle with him. It's a side shot right on to him driving. And the film's really slow for you to pick up on what the intentions are, what exactly is going on. It's very patient. And we eventually learn that this man is looking for someone to fulfill a set of tasks that he has for his plan to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And then he has these conversations in the car with various people that he picks up or that he talks to through the window, or he gets out of the car completely, and et cetera, et cetera. So the film focuses a lot on this understated. It's very understated with how it has human companionship and how Mr. Body talks to, and even at first we can just go right talking about the first person he picks up is the young army student.
Yes.
Right. And it's interesting watching the dynamic happen because Mr. Body is so focused on what his task is and him trying to end his life that he doesn't even realize how he sounds to the young boy. His lines are very ambiguous, like, hey, can you, basically like, hey, can you come in my car? I want to take you somewhere. I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is, but would you like a lot of money for it? So in a way, we can dig into this a little bit later, but the film follows this man who is having a crisis with life, and he is having trouble. He's not realizing how everything sounds or appears in front of him. And there's many circumstances how this occurs at various different levels throughout the movie. Obviously, the film's big point is how he's not enjoying life the way that he could be, right? And that's in relation to the title. But there's all these smaller instances, like how he interacts with his first companion in the car, the boy, and how he sounds in maybe more of a bad way there.
Yes. It strangely, Christopher, it just occurred to me that this is kind of how Exotica unfolds, where you're like, what's the relationship between these two people? Where's this going? And you have to wait. Like it's not apparent at all what the relational dynamics are, or what the person even wants.
Right.
Or what the heck has even happened. And the movie doesn't care that you don't know yet. So it starts off quite uncomfortable because you're like, what the heck is this guy going to ask? And so you feel like the passenger.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost feel like the way that the movie unfolds, as he meets new people, it becomes increasingly more comfortable because they're like, we're becoming more comfortable, almost like we're learning why he's doing this. He's getting better at expressing it. And so then the people, it gets a little bit easier and easier, maybe, as it goes on.
We're certainly acclimating to the environment.
Yeah. As bizarre as it is.
I don't know if he, the lead character, actually expresses himself better as the movie goes on. But I think as viewers and passengers in the car, we are certainly adapting to his dynamic in particular, and how he receives people, and what his task is.
And perhaps maybe that each person he picks up has a greater level of empathy, because the first person that he meets is like, get out of here, I'll punch you in the face. The second person is extremely skeptical, reasonably, and runs away. But then each person subsequently following does get more and more compassionate.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I think one of the more obvious things that Kiarostami does is the basic structure are the three main people that he picks up in the car. So you have the young army boy, you have the younger but middle-aged man who is part of a seminary. Yep. And then you have the older man who's a taxidermist. And I think all of those pieces are important. So as you're saying, obviously each of them receive him differently. And they all have different levels of empathy.
Right.
It's a little bit ironic that the person who has the most empathy is the man who has the profession that is closest linked to death, which would be the taxidermy, how he stuffs animals and etc. But he's the man who explains his own epiphany to him much later on.
Right.
But I think you're absolutely right. There's a structure here, and it progressively gets more empathetic, but you're also looking at the stages of life. You're looking at a young boy, a middle-aged man, and an older man.
Good point. That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
And I think that it also illustrates in a way that the person who comes at the end, who's willing to help him, the distinction between him, besides the taxidermist, is that he himself understands, because he wanted to kill himself at a certain point. So it's almost also expressing in a way that the one who is most able to help you is someone who was there themselves, or the one who's the most willing is the one who says, like, I've been where you are right now, and I can speak to that, as opposed to someone like the seminarian who has beliefs but can't relate.
Yes.
And then the boy, of course, can't at all relate.
It's a lack of experience. And yeah,
right.
excellently said, because the second example, the seminarist, he has all of the religious perspectives. You know, if anyone's going to make an argument for life, that's typically where those are based, right? But he doesn't have the almost like a practical grasp of things in order to explain that. Because when he's presented with the task, when he finds out what it is from Mr. Body, he's like, well, what do you mean? Suicide's a sin. And like, it's almost like a computer. Like, he hears it and he's like, does not compute. Suicide is a sin. This is the end of the conversation. I can't help you.
Right.
Right. And you explain the other 2 points beautifully. The young boy has no experience, and then obviously the old man is
relates personally. It kind of reminds me of like the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the priest passed by and didn't help this guy who's dying on the side of the road, and the person who stops is like the sworn enemy of the Jews, because Samaritans and Jews did not get along and didn't help each other, and he's the one that offers him help. And then the whole thing is like, you know, I think they asked Jesus, like, who is my neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the person who has mercy on you, like the person who helps. And it is that way with this guy. It's like not necessarily that you would imagine this would be the person who'd help him, but it makes total sense in context.
Right. And he also understands, just like the seminarist understands that, you know, suicide is wrong, but he still, there's a little bit of a nuance there. And as we've already said, yeah.
Where he doesn't necessarily want to support him, but he also knows how he feels. And then he tries to give him a counter argument.
Well, and his whole time in the car is a counter argument.
Right. Exactly. Right. So we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I like that the idea too of like, it's kind of a journey film, like it's kind of a road trip movie in a weird way, even though they keep going back to the same location.
Right.
You know, he keeps bringing them back to this place where with the hole, where like he wants to go and die, and then have someone come and basically bury him, because he's going to take a bunch of sleeping pills, get in the hole at night, and he wants somebody to come and put dirt over him so that he's, you know, so that he can have somebody there to do it. And this guy, obviously, I guess he has no family or anybody who can do these things. And so he's asking for help from strangers.
Right. It's an existential problem, right? That's what the movie's focusing on. The man is having an existential crisis, right? And I if I may, I want to make a connection to something else. It starts, everything around this movie revolves around the car. Okay, so I think the car is a very important device in what Kiarostami is trying to say and tell, with his themes, the narrative structure. I mean, if you look at the way that the camera, how he uses the camera throughout the film, it's all the camera either static or it's pivoting in place. It's not, there's no zooms, there's no dolly shots, there's nothing like that. It's very, the camera is meant to simulate us being in the car, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now the car, this kind of goes along with the point I was bringing up before about how Mr. Body doesn't, he's not seeing or perceiving things the way that maybe they are. And as the movie goes on, he has all these instances. I mean, he's driving a car in a third world country, right? So that's like the first thing. Like he has some things that other people around him don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think this all kind of goes toward, you know, the reflection that the film's going for, like the things that you have, the things that are around you, a gratefulness, if you will.
Yeah. Gratitude. Yeah.
Gratitude.
Yeah.
I mean, he has this car and it's a Land Rover, and I'm, you know, for the 90s, and for that part of the world, I'd say that's a pretty, you know, luxurious thing for all intents and purposes. But the connection I want to make is this car. I think Kiarostami is using the car just like how Samuel Beckett uses the imagery of a boot or a shoe in Waiting for Godot.
Mm.
Because these are items that we use obviously to travel with, but metaphorically they symbolize something that has a soul, I think, because I mean, shoes and boots have souls, literally. Yeah. So like for Beckett's theater of the absurd, this makes sense that way. And that play also covers existential crisis in a very similar way. But the car here, I think, is apt because, I mean, it has an engine. It sort of has man-made life, but it's a tool and a vehicle that endures. You know, the people get in it. It's supposed to be a protective shell, and it's something that he's using in how he copes with his current thoughts. I mean, he's literally driving through the world. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
No, yeah. And trying to like get away from something.
Exactly. Yeah. Getting away from something, or is he going towards something?
Right. Well, both. Yeah. He's moving away from life and then towards death and away, or
Yeah.
trying to. Yeah.
So I think Kiarostami is very, he's very aware of everything that he's doing at the most basic levels. Using the car, using a road, having the camera be so minimal with how it's simulating being a passenger. All of these things are so simple, yet they evoke a very profound sense of the world.
Yeah, I watched an interview too about where Film Scholar was talking about that at the beginning it starts in like construction and there's an industrialized society feel. And then the longer that the movie goes on, the more they get into just nature, and they're not surrounded by cranes and, you know, workers and stuff. As the further along it goes, the more the natural state is, because that's what the conversation is moving towards, especially with the final character and him trying to appeal to him to want to live because of sensory things, like loving, you know, the sun, and don't you want to see a sunset? Don't you want to taste this? He's trying to say, like, do you feel life?
Yes.
And then appeal to that. So we're seeing the same things that the ideas are presenting, I think.
And that's interesting, because if I want to tie it to what I just said about the car, it's paradoxical to think that the car and something so man-made has such a relationship with something so natural like the earth.
Yes.
They touch each other, right? So
right.
It's an intimate relationship with these things, and how they coexist together. It's very interesting. Like, the more all of these things sound so maybe easy, or, you know, again, basic, but it's very meditative, and sometimes just simple is better.
Yes, especially if what they're saying is so weighty. I think that if this had been flashy at all, it would have been such a disservice and distraction to what's being said, because it is kind of like Stalker in that way, where it allows you to think and to reflect and to take it in,
right?
Because it's not in a hurry, and there are these pauses, and thoughtful things are being said, and the situation's pretty intense.
Yes.
And the subject is intense, but it's oddly soothing. It's very relaxing.
It is. It's incredibly relaxing.
Yeah. Almost like you could fall asleep during it.
Well, so that's an interesting thing to bring up. I didn't fall asleep. No, I did not.
Oh, okay. I was like, Christopher.
Yeah, no. But it's good, because I think maybe this is a question you have for me. I'm just going to say it anyway. But this is the second time I saw the movie. Okay, so the first time to the second time watching this, it's definitely a film that improves upon a second watch. And as we started this episode, I gave a very rough recount of how we were introduced to the main character. So when you're watching it the second time, you're already filled in to all of his motives, what's going on. So seeing it in those fresh eyes, really, for me, it made it better.
Yes.
Having all the context.
It's also strangely, this is happening to me now too, where it's almost like the more honest that you are in your own life, and the more transparent you are, you begin to see those motives in others more clearly. Like if the more accustomed you are to speaking directly and hearing the truth, the more that you reflect that, and then people reflect it back at you. It's almost like seeing, like what you're describing is like how you could see something one way, and then when you know the truth about it,
it reveals itself.
Exactly. But it was there for you.
And I think that's exactly Kiarostami's point, right?
Right.
It's almost necessary to watch this movie multiple times, because the point is proven almost. Like, you saw this before, but it wasn't. Now you're seeing it completely differently.
Yes.
Right.
And that happens with people all the time, where you could be irritated with somebody or think somebody's a jerk, and then you find out their son just died or they're on their way to a funeral.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden you can see,
yes,
like you can assess the situation and be like, oh, and it literally changes, not just in your head. It changes for you.
It changes on a dime. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Almost like, yeah, actually, like against your will, like you don't choose to change. The change occurs.
Regardless, you see it.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Right. Which is powerful in a way, because it's almost like really we should all be walking around with that humility of like, I don't know what this person who just cut me off in traffic, I don't know where they're going.
There are so many reasons for something to be the way that it is, as opposed to having a cynical outlook or assuming these things. Yeah, it's exactly right. You can never know someone's full story
at any given time.
Exactly.
And interesting too that Kiarostami decided not to tell us, because one of the conversations is, well, what happened? Like, what's the problem? And he's like, you wouldn't understand. You don't feel what I feel. I'm not going to get into it. There's hints about what it could be, but it really isn't the point what it is at all. No. Like, he doesn't tell us. And I almost feel like it honestly doesn't matter at all, strangely, even though in a normal film with a normal plot narrative, that would be quite, motive or
yes.
Why do you want to kill yourself would be like the main thing that we're trying to get to.
That would be exactly. It'd be the penultimate
yes
thing.
Like the reveal of, oh, there was this trauma and now, it all makes sense, or at least it makes sense for the character, but there is no such thing that happens, and it feels oddly fine that it doesn't, I think.
Yes. I agree with that.
Yeah, I guess because it's not a film about why. It's more a film about, is there a way to turn? Like, is there a way a person in such a state could be taken out of it?
And to tag along with that would be, it's going to the road trip movie theme. It's about the journey, not so much the destination in some regards. I mean, the focus here is the traveling.
Yeah, the road to decision making.
It's the emphasis on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. I have to read this, so we're a bit all over the place, but this is great.
No, I know. I agree with you.
No, this is great. So one of my favorite books is by Augustin Burroughs. I've said this many times. It's called This Is How, where he talks about all sorts of different issues, like how to be fat, how to be thin, how to be happy, how to be sad, how to live in the past, blah, blah, blah. So he has a chapter that is how to end your life. And there's 2 points I want to bring up and see what you think about them.
Okay.
The first one has to do with what we just were talking about. So he says here, if you believe suicide will bring you peace, or at the very least, just an end to everything you hate, you are actually displaying self-caring behavior. You are still able to actively seek solutions to your problems. You are willing to go to great lengths to provide what you believe will be soothing to yourself. This strikes me as optimistic. So
interesting.
That idea, because this whole movie is this guy being quite diligent about this thing, very proactive. Mm-hmm. So he's actually at I would say, more of an openness to being convinced that he should save himself than the average person is. What do you think about that idea?
That's truly a fascinating one, and one that I think if you were to take all the people in the world, I think that would be a common string between a lot of people. Don't
How
you?
so?
I
How so do you mean particularly?
well, I think that I'll try with an example maybe. So
Okay.
I think that if you have experienced high intense forms of anxiety and you suffer from panic attacks, I think that when you're experiencing a panic attack, it feels very much like you are dying when you are not
Mm-hmm.
dying. And when you
Mm-hmm.
come off or away from the panic attack, um, there is a massive sense of relief when that happens. And I think that relates to um, how we perceive things, but also I'm not I'm not going to dismiss anxiety or panic attacks or anything. You know, I've experienced them myself, but it's you just have a sense of gratitude. There's a different feel for gratitude, I think, after when it passes, a sense of
Right.
relief. Do
Right.
you know what I'm saying? I
Yes.
not sure I'm being eloquent about it.
No, it's almost like it's not necessarily that your survival instinct kicks in. It's almost that you have an acute sense that you're actually happy to be alive.
Exactly. And I did not articulate that at all. But yes, that is well said. Good job.
Like, oh, I actually want to live. This is the second point that this is perfectly leading into the second point, which is Augustine talks about that it isn't that you want it's not that the person wants to die.
Mm-hmm.
It's that they want to end their life, meaning the life that they currently have. They want that to be over. So what he says in this part, which I'm going to read to you, is this is the choice you don't see when you decide to kill yourself. This is the choice that never even crosses your mind. You can leave. You can open the front door, step outside, and make a right or a left and keep going. Yes, but what about school? What about your wife? What about your kids? What about money? What about all your furniture? What about picking up the car at the shop tomorrow? Well, yes, it's destructive, but it is a choice, and it's a better choice than suicide. In a way, suicide is a disease of the eyes. It destroys peripheral vision. Leaving your life is like getting an intramuscular injection of options. Maybe this new life will be worse. Maybe this new life will be better. Maybe this new life will make you lonely for your old broken life that suddenly won't seem so broken. You are allowed to be alive. You are allowed to be somebody different. And you are allowed to not say goodbye to anybody or explain a single thing to anyone ever. So I have this idea of like, this guy is somebody who actually wants a new life. And the only way that he can see a new life is by him being dead. But that's actually not true. It's just that he's blinded by the scenario that he's in, by the pain.
Pain or the anxiety or too many thoughts going through his head.
And the trauma maybe of what he
may certainly have
through.
Trauma. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right.
And I that's a very, I want to say practical quote, I suppose, when if you look at it and you present yourself with all of the options, it is most certainly an option if someone's already weighing death on the table.
Exactly.
It's just something that is perhaps skipped over because it's not logically fluid with our lives.
Right. Well, so the climax of this movie, tell us about the taste of cherry. Like
what it means.
Tell us about, like that whole conversation. How does that strike you on sort of both a personal level maybe, but also do you relate to that persuasion of him trying to convince him with the terms that he does?
Yeah, I think so. So first, let me introduce it as you said. So, the taste of cherry comes up with the third main passenger in Mr. Body's car, which is the old taxidermist, and he's spent the entire car ride having a counter argument once he realizes that Mr. Body wants him to help him commit suicide. And he tells a story after having quite a few platitudes or whatever you want to call it. Like, he has a lot of inspirational things that he says. And then he finally gets to a point where he wants to tell his own anecdote of how just one day he was on his way to kill himself, and he walks over to a tree, and it ends up being a mulberry tree. And he has this moment where he tastes, he's suddenly he senses everything around him. Like he experiences the taste of the berry. He feels the sun on his skin. He feels, he sees the sun, he feels the wind. All of these things that join together with your point about coming with nature, but also how everything that was before him just moments ago all of a sudden looked totally different. And then he has the epiphany of this gratitude of life. And his monologue basically ends with, don't you want to, wake up again tomorrow? Don't you want to taste the things that you like? And so that's what the title refers to.
Yeah. Why would you give up the taste of cherries is the line.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's poetic. And I guess to answer your second question, I think I relate to what he's saying because I feel as though I'm a very receptive individual. So meaning that things that are very poetic or, visual, I guess they don't have to be visual, but those things, I find myself, it's easy for me to be in tune with those things, or to find things that I like and grasp onto them, and then maybe think about why I like them, or
be moved by
it. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so you feel like you're more receptive just naturally.
Yes.
In sort of like an artistic fashion. And I actually think Kiarostami himself is as well. And that's why all of his films more or less have this vibe.
Right.
As well as it reminds me of the guy who did Drive My Car, Hamaguchi.
Mm-hmm.
Also has that sense, or even the Decalogue.
Right.
There's this sense of like, you have these moral conundrums, you have real individuals that aren't necessarily, there's not really a protagonist and an antagonist. It's just these ideas,
scenarios, situations, actions.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're able to ponder, which of these guys would I be? Would I be the seminarian? Would I be the taxidermist? Would I tell the guy to get lost?
Yeah.
Would I help him at all?
Right.
And then, as it sort of gets towards the end, you kind of wonder if anything is getting through to this guy. But he kind of chases after the taxidermist in a way and says, like, the white coat suits you. I think he thought he was a doctor or something initially. And the guy who helps him also has a child who's sick. That's another thing, which feels very biblical to me. Parable, biblical.
Yeah.
Yeah. That he would have a child who's ill, and, be doing it partly for that motivation. But then there's also this thing about truth and illusion. So getting to the ending part.
Okay.
What do you think happens? And what do you think he's saying at the very end? I have my own opinion, but I'm curious as to what yours is.
Well, I've thought about it a lot, and I don't think I exactly have an answer, and that's probably a cop-out. It kind of goes along with my my previous responses already. I just sort of go along with it. So it almost doesn't matter to me what he does at the end because of how relaxing the previous hour and 20 minutes have been. Really, I mean, maybe I'm a minority there or an outlier. I want him, of course, to be alive at the end and not choose suicide, but that's not where my mind goes when the movie ends.
It also.
So I don't know.
I just thought
if you have your own answer, I mean, please.
No. Well, I was thinking more in terms of what you think about the cut, of what you think about it showing the artifice of it.
Oh, okay. So like the end, not sorry.
No. But that's both. Pause, because you just made me think of a line that I loved.
Okay.
Which was that the guy, the taxidermist says, "I want to tell you a joke," which isn't really a joke, but this fits what you just said.
Excellent.
Which is he's saying that he touches his wrist and his wrist hurt. The doctor says, "Where does it hurt?" Basically, in your body. Why are you here? And he's like, "When I touch my wrist hurts. When I touch my cheek hurts. When I touch my stomach hurts. When I touch my leg hurts." And the doctor says, well, your body's fine, but your finger's broken.
Right. It's your mind that's ill. And that's what the old man says. So out of the joke, he goes, "It's your mind that's ill, man." Like,
change your outlook. Right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. But this whole idea of like, let's pretend that your consciousness or your illusion, like your inability to see reality or appreciate reality, is like having a broken finger. It's like you are thinking that everything around you is wrong because you're touching it with something that's faulty, that's something that needs to be healed. And if you can heal the mechanism by which you are interpreting,
sensing,
all of a sudden everything around you is not broken.
Right. Or they appear as they are. As
yes,
they actually are.
As they actually are. And so that ties into this whole idea of artifice, because I watched an interview with Kiarostami, who's such a cool dude. He had sunglasses on the whole time and he's so chill. So chill. He said he would prefer a movie that he completely fell asleep in than one that provoked him and upset him for days, because the one that he fell asleep in is the one he's going to rewatch and think about. Anyway,
I like that.
Apt.
Very much.
I knew you would. So Truth and Illusion also makes me think of Virginia Woolf, because there's like, what, you don't know the difference, but that's a side stuff.
Okay.
But okay, so he is showing us this picture of this person's reality by using the artifice of film. The movie itself feels very real to us because the characters are speaking in such a vulnerable way. And then at the moment that you would have a climax as to whether or not the person's dead, he steps out of the hole, gets a cigarette out of his pocket, and you see a film crew. Now, people have been outraged at this ending. I've read many reviews where people literally will write the entire movie off because they show the film crew and it's so jarring and there's no explanation whatsoever, and then it's over. Or he shows the military men sort of playing with a flower and then it's done.
Right.
But what the guy is saying is, uno momento, he is saying that when you make a movie, you have to believe the story yourself. We put a series of lies together to show a higher truth. So he's saying if you can admit that certain things are manufactured and that there's certain things in life like routines, ways we go about our lives that are fake, okay, perhaps it is through those things that we're able to see it all. And so that's why he shows the crew.
Yeah.
Because this is actually a helpful tool rather than undermining the process.
Yes. You bring up an interesting, like, it's nature versus man-made, like natural versus the natural state versus the non-natural state of things, which we've already touched upon. But I think, gosh, so that ending, I love it.
I do too.
Yeah, I am not one of the detractors of that that scene. It's art. So art always has this interesting idea behind it, because you have the artist who is creating, right? So you almost
Mm-hmm.
have like this, you have this metaphor for maybe God or something, right? But they are creating something in their own controlled environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an interesting way to look at art, and maybe how Kiarostami is applying that meta to the fictional story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think the other big thing is how death is not the end. Okay, so like we always in our minds we think death is the end, or depending on who you are, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What your beliefs are. In a practical sense, death is seen as the end, but it's not really the end, right? So Kiarostami's whole film is about taking this journey, and then the moment that death happens, it's sort of like it's just part of this transcendental process that moves the soul along to wherever it's going to go. So then we see this other part where it's like, okay, the guy who was supposed to just die is actually there and still living life.
Yes.
Do you see what I'm trying to go with?
Yes, I
So now,
do.
I also want to tie
Yeah.
that to the whole passenger in the car thing. Okay. So maybe it's, as I've already mentioned, it's not about the end point of what we think death is, right? So it's about the journey, and I think Kiarostami's point is it's about the people and the relationships that we pick up along the way. Very literally with Mr. Body, he picks up all these people, and the action of the film is all these conversations he has, and I that to me is what is very similar to the example I brought up earlier about Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Um, these characters, they travel, and that they travel on foot. So the boot has the symbolism the car does in here. But it's about who, like, even though everything might seem bleak, they the fact of the matter is that they have each other. So like that's the theme of, like, that's the through line of Waiting for Godot, or one of the through lines. I don't want to reduce it to just that, but that is exactly what's happening here in Taste of Cherry.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things are just brushes, happenstances with people, common people that he maybe otherwise wouldn't interact with.
But also, Christopher, seeing the film crew also implies that you think that you see people by happenstance, but everything's orchestrated. We can't see behind the scenes of our own life.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, right? You can't, all the
Right?
people that you interact with, you don't know their whole story to an extent.
But also but I mean in terms of like providence. I mean in terms of like you.
Sure, yes.
Like you can't see what's going on behind the scenes. I mean like, yeah. Like that there could be this, that you think that you're making all of these decisions, but there is an authorship involved. Like it's that whole what is that movie where this guy has like an ontological argument about God, and he's saying, they're talking about free will. I think it's in a Ferrera film where the guy's like totally coked up and I can't remember what this movie is.
Film.
Yes, and he's like talking about the existence of God as he's snorting cocaine. It's a really good scene, and I don't know why I don't know what this is from. I want to say King of New York, but
I feel as though I should know the answer.
I know there's a scene, and it's a famous actor, and he's talking about it. Anyway, it's that whole thing of like, are we just reading from a script? Is everything I'm even saying right now like, it's written down somewhere that I was going to say
predetermined?
So, yes. Or like, Oz behind the curtain sort of
I know
idea.
what you mean. Obviously, we did an outline for this episode, you're not talking about the outline. You're talking about the other outline.
Yes.
If it exists.
The dream within the dream,
Yes.
within the dream. Yeah, because by sort of showing that, it's also saying that you can't even decide to kill yourself without there's just things that are happening outside of your own consciousness, and you think that you're alone, or that you assume that you are, or that you're small in this grand scheme of things. But what if you aren't? And then that just sort of opens up this level of not just gratitude, but personal significance.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's
yeah.
I'm going to make another movie connection. It ties into beautifully to how what you just said, right? Personal significance is something that we find affinity towards. It's a Wonderful Life, right? George Bailey's story.
Oh, yeah.
Like, his story is very much like that. It's, I am significant, even if the entire world never gets to see me, right? The people who mattered to me most saw me, and these are the things that mattered.
And It's a Wonderful Life really is all about George seeing that.
Well, exactly. And he battles suicide, right? So that's like, this is more apt in multiple ways here. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like all the movies that I love that where the person has some sort of transformation are always about, and I did this in that best version list, and this is so true of sobriety too. It's always about you seeing, like me seeing, the person seeing what is in front of them and being able to accurately assess their circumstance. It's not to say that everything's hunky-dory at that point, because it isn't. It's actually what we're running away from half the time, more than half the time. But you can actually do something with the information, as opposed to all the illusion part that you just can't do anything with lies or untruths, let's say.
It's just the plain fact that you have all the options that you could possibly have in front of you, and it's up to you to choose which road you go down, to tie it to the movie. Again, it seems like very simple concepts, but Kiarostami has a very meditative way of looking at it.
Yeah. He described the film as starting off where a character is in a stuffy room and opens a window. So it does have that sense of like, the longer it goes, the more the air is clear.
Which is why it's such a comforting film.
Yes, strangely. Even though you don't know where it ends up. And then you're hit with like this random shot of them making the movie and saying the shoot is over. And it seems like that would be incredibly jarring. And that you'd be like, whoa. But when I first saw this, I mean, I watched this movie at like 6 a.m, so I was a little bit tired at the time. I remember it was very early in the morning and it was dark outside. But I remember just thinking like that was the most natural thing, and then just sitting there. It's like Memoria in that way. I always come back to Memoria, but just like that feeling of like you just saw something that was quite unique.
Of course, yeah.
In its transcendence or what it's saying.
Yeah.
So, sort of wrap things up.
Sure.
Do you think that what convinces us to stick around is something that's sensory, or do you think that it's different than that? Like, do you think on the whole, not just for yourself, but in general, but then for yourself, if you want to answer that?
I think it's a combination.
Do you think that people's reason is both?
I certainly think it's both, because we grapple with how we function in the world, and a lot of the ways that humans function in the world is through a man-made structure of how we think things
Mm-hmm.
are supposed to be. So there you have forces like tradition or even morality. You have all these things that we try to purposely stick upright and build something for the sake of the future. And that's more of something where you would use your mind, I think, right? So that'd be like the more logical, practical sense. But then you have this whole other aspect to it, which is nature. And I mean, this is the battle of life, right? You accept nature in certain ways, but then there are other ways where nature should probably be tamed, and that's the whole question. Maybe not exactly what Kiarostami, or specifically what Kiarostami is asking here, but I think that people, when they go through life, they are constantly juggling these two main things. It's the structure that we've created for ourselves, and then also the way that we are natural.
Mm. And then trying to find happiness and peace between the two.
It's really simplified that way, and I think it's way more complex than just those two things, but there is a dance that happens with both of them.
Right. And I think that you hit it on the head too when you said that the whole point is that there's a relationship with others, because the longer I sort of analyze these things, I keep coming back to that really the only thing that feels good is being of service. And I mean, meaning if you can share something that makes somebody feel less alone or more understood or ease their suffering in any way, that's what feels good. It's not,
So when you
doing things for
so when
yourself.
you look back at the movie, I don't really recall with the young boy, but with the seminarian and the taxidermist, there are multiple minutes that happen in sequence where, specifically with the taxidermist, when he enters the car, he
Mhm.
talks. I timed it, not exactly, but he talks for about 4 minutes before we even see his face. He gets in
Right.
the car, he's talking to our lead character, and all we hear, the camera's pointed at the main character, and there are just words. Okay,
Right.
I think this goes to your point, and also the point I made before. It's with the journey and the ride, and it's who we meet on the ride, because this man is saying so many comforting things once he realizes the motive of the lead character, and he's trying, basically those 4 minutes I think is his counter argument to Mr. Body. And it's interesting we don't see his face, because it doesn't matter what he looks like or who exactly he is. I think it's an example of just not knowing people, not knowing their whole story, but then hearing them for what they are.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And not judging them based on what they look like or anything. It's just a voice.
It's a voice, but and to your point, it's these comforting words that that are what we're processing.
Right. It's like the truth is just powerful. I mean, when you hear it and it gets down there, and I think that this character is oddly incredibly, like, Mr. Bodhi's character is so, he's like an open wound walking
Mm-hmm.
around. It's almost, I think, admirable in a way, because even though he's very much like, I want your helping hand, not your mind, or,
Right.
I don't want your tongue or your mind. I don't want to be like preached at. If I want to be preached at, I would go to somebody smarter than you. He tells the seminarian that stuff. He just wants someone to do this. It's clear that that's not the only thing that he wants, because he keeps picking people up, and he keeps having to be in this situation where he is hearing what he should do. And he does look up at the moon, and, you know, there is this sense of like something is seeping in, but it gets back to what we said about when your perspective shifts, you do think differently. You don't choose to think differently. And those, I think, are the moments where it's like, now your choice is, do I do something about it or not? But now I know. So that's different than not knowing.
Yeah, and I think your whole process would begin to change. The whole process in which you handle something changes once you see it differently. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I will say that if our lead character is an open wound, he probably should live somewhere else, because it is very, very dusty, and wounds can get very infected.
Yes.
If they are not cleaned properly.
Christopher, you just had to end it there. We just hit the 1 hour mark, and I was about to say, and then you made it. All right.
You're welcome.
That, thank you. Christopher is a professional podcaster, and you need to check him out.
I am certainly not professional. I'm not. I am far away from that. But I think we say a lot of good things on the podcast.
Yes. Shout out to Benjamin and Kevin and
the boys.
I appreciate you. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. Everybody needs to see Taste of Cherry. It affects me greatly on a rewatch, but affected me very much in the first time. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it when you get around to it.
I hope so too.
Thank you, Christopher.
Yeah, thank you
for being
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you at the movies.